My name is Reverend Casey Taylor. I am from Chicago, Illinois. I worked as a TV executive for Viola Davis for a few years before randomly in 2020 hearing the call to quit my job and let my intuition lead. And my intuition ultimately led me to Oklahoma somehow, some way, I couldn't even tell you. And when I arrived, pretty shortly after I arrived, I was invited to serve at CSU Youth Services. I was invited to apply for a shelter staff position at CSU about 3 months after I arrived in Oklahoma City. And when I first arrived, the bar Alibis was the first place that I went, and there were a lot of people who talked about CSU there. So I got to learn a lot about the place before I got an opportunity to apply for the shelter position. And since 2021, I have served in a variety of roles at CSU Youth Services. I've worked in the shelter, I have been a case manager, I helped launch the direct cash transfer program, which is a pilot program where Oklahoma was the very first direct cash transfer program in Oklahoma that I got to help launch. I supported the Youth Action Board, and I also served as the supportive adult for a support space at OKC Improv that was youth-led. I cannot think of the name of it off the top of my head, but worked in a variety of roles at CSU, and I'm currently working as a floater because over the course of the last year, I've been serving as the senior minister of the United Life Center for Spiritual Living. That's my current full-time gig. So I am a floater at CSU. Whenever there's a shift that they need to fill in a hole, I get a list at the beginning of the month letting me know what the open shifts are, and if I have any availability, I fill them. That's my current role. I am incredibly grateful for this invitation to reflect on my coming out story. I came out in 1999 at a time when anti-gay rhetoric was really loud. And what my coming out process looked like in the 90s and the aughts is so different than how it's looked in the 2020s. That in the 90s, anti-gay rhetoric was at the forefront of American conversation. Ellen came out of the closet in 1996, and it caused all kinds of furor. The Don't Ask, Don't Tell was introduced at the American military in 1993, and I said it was 99, but it was 98 actually that I began to recognize that I was gay. So being queer, even that word, gay, queer, lesbian, what, still working on that one, but I realized that I was queer in 1998, and the world wasn't kind to me around it. And I didn't choose to have conversations with people about it. Even the first realization that I had that I was queer, that really came up for me loud and clear in 98, was my best friend, who just happens to live in Oklahoma, asked me if I thought I might be gay. And for somebody who knows me very, very well to ask this question, I really sat and asked myself this question too. I turned off the noise of the world around me, and I asked myself this question and started looking for lesbians around me. And thankfully, I didn't have to look very far. There were a couple of girls in my high school that were out and wore their rainbow pride gear and were who they were. They were a year below me, and I just happened to be on the badminton team with one of them. So I just kind of cozied up to them, asked them a bunch of questions, dated them in high school. And in high school, it was my senior year of high school that I began to explore what that meant for me, but I wasn't trying to come out. It was just my process of figuring it out and asking myself these questions. I went through a process, the process of figuring it out. And the people who I communicated to responded in really big ways. I thought about a paper that I wrote in my English class, my senior year English class. And I don't remember, it might have been a book report about a book that was about a lesbian that was in high school. Whatever it was, I came out in my English paper. And it just happened to be in that particular moment that instead of just turning in the paper, the teacher decided we were going to trade papers and have a conversation with whoever we had to trade papers with and talk about it. So I basically thought I was coming out to my English teacher, and in reality I was coming out to whatever random person I was paired with in my English class in that moment. And it was awkward and it was terrible, and whoever it was not incredibly supportive. It wasn't like, oh no, this must be so hard, let me be supportive. It was whoever this was giving me a side eye and perpetuating all of the fears that I'd had. And at some point, my parents sat me down and asked me if I was gay, and I told them the truth. I told them I didn't know. I told them about the girls I was involved with in high school, and my mom expressed big concern for me. She said, I'm worried about how much life will be harder for you. And I said that as a mixed race person, that they hadn't worried about how difficult my life would be for this identity. I really felt like my identity of being mixed race perfectly prepared me to be gay in a world that was anti-gay. Because being mixed race in the 90s was also no picnic. Mariah Carey was constantly coming out as being mixed race, and people were giving her all kinds of a hard time about it, and she was rich and famous and successful and talented. So the amount of bullying that I faced for being mixed race from black people and from white people, realizing that I was gay by the time I was 17, I was like, bring it on. I am not even worried about this. So when I was in high school and somebody bullied me, they weren't bullying me. There was a girl in my high school that was bullying my girlfriend. And the school found out about it and called me out of class, called me to the office, and they had a police officer there and told this girl that what she was doing was a hate crime. And I'd never been supported by my school. I'd been beat up in school for all kinds of reasons, and this girl didn't lift a hand to touch me or my girlfriend. She was really just talking in the hallways, talking mess in the hallways, and I wasn't messed up about it. So for me, being queer was the first identity that I had that I actually had support, because the world was so anti-gay. There was a gay community that was like, this isn't cool. We're looking out for you. We're creating spaces for you to be who you are. We want you to advocate for yourself. Being mixed raced, none of those spaces existed. So despite the fact that coming out in '98 was not easy, the fact that there were people in the country that were talking about it, the fact that I had language for it, and having the personal experience of dealing with bullying around my identity, I just felt prepared to shoulder it and withstand it. And I never expected that. I'm talking '98, so within 15 years of me coming out as a teenager, that same-sex marriage would be the lay of the land in the United States. I didn't see that coming. The progression of our culture being anti-gay to federally recognized, my marriage federally recognized, I didn't see that transition happening in my lifetime, much less within 15 years from that moment. So as we're living in this current state where I feel like anti-trans legislature is big, it reminds me so much of what life in the 90s was like when I was coming out, and anti-gay legislature was so big. I feel like as a country we go through these moments where we have to get the topics that we've swept under the rug, they've got to come out. We've got to have the conversations. People got to stand up and say, this is who I am. And people got to stand up and say, I am not cool with who you are. And we got to have those conversations out loud. People got to propose their legislature. We got to have these conversations and duke it out in the court systems and let things evolve in the ways that they evolve so that our coming out experience transcends. It feels so good to reflect on how coming out in 1998 was such a consistent thing. People were constantly sitting me down saying, are you gay? And reacting to me being gay. I haven't had anybody sit me down and ask me if I'm gay or react to me being queer, and I can't think of how long. So that vast shift in cultural consciousness of having all of these questions and all of these feelings and all of these reactions to my identity to, in 2025, my identity essentially being a non-issue. I'm grateful for the evolution. I have to credit Sisu for inspiring me to come out as gender nonconforming. I've always known I was gender nonconforming, and in the world of gender non-binary, meaning something specific, and they, them as pronouns being associated with gender non-binary, I didn't feel like as a gender non-conforming person that they, them were the right pronouns for me until I came to Sisu. Because Sisu was the very first place I had ever been that didn't require that education of what it meant to use they, them pronouns. I could just say, I use they, them pronouns, and somebody apologizes and then starts using my pronouns correctly. That there's no explanation, there's no education necessary, and being in a place where I got to use they, them pronouns without having to educate people, I recognized that I was ready to make the decision to own and honor who I am as a gender nonconforming person, and to decide that from this point forward, I am using they, them pronouns. And at this point, like I said, this started from Sisu. When I was a case manager at Sisu, all of the case managers on the team, we were the very first team of case managers, and each and every one of them used they, them pronouns but me. And I found myself consistently advocating for them. Every meeting that we were in, as they were being misgendered in spaces outside of Sisu, I found myself consistently advocating for them. And I realized that if the only thing preventing me from using they, them pronouns is that I didn't want to advocate for it, and I found myself advocating for it anyway, what was keeping me from it? So I decided, because I was getting married, that when I changed my last name, that I was going to come out using they, them pronouns. So October 2nd of 2022, I became Reverend Casey Taylor and used they, them pronouns, and that's been who I am. And since living in Oklahoma City, I've been in Oklahoma City the entire time that I've been using they, them pronouns. And Oklahoma City has been a place that has been so welcoming and accepting of my pronouns in a way that I would have never expected. My spiritual community, the United Life Center for Spiritual Living, there's a diverse group of people at this center, and many of them have learned to use my pronouns, and those who haven't, I let them not. The way that I choose to identify as gender nonconforming means that generally I choose not to please people. If you forget what my pronouns are, or you misgender me sometimes, whatever, I'm not coming for you. Somebody else wants to come for you on my behalf, y'all do y'all, but this is what it means for me, because I've got all of these identities in one body. This is one area that I am not choosing to educate people on if I don't feel like it in the moment. And as often as it comes up, generally I don't. But I am incredibly grateful that most of the times that I am being misgendered, it is not by Oklahomans. It is by people in California. It is by people in Chicago. It's the kind of cities that people would never expect that using they, them pronouns would be such a challenge in comparison to the ease that I've had in Oklahoma City. So I'm grateful that that coming out process and experience has been relatively easy, and I'm grateful that all of the lessons learned from coming out in the late 90s and the evolution of our country have perfectly prepared me for this moment.